All right, social platforms. Welcome to this week's Jumpstart Mastery Live. Betrayal of Trust When Friends Cross the Line. Great topic selection by Brenda at BE Branding. We'll just give it a moment for folks to come in. And after my gigantic dog hopefully stops barking, let me get the stream key into Instagram. I hope you all are well. I'm sure that many of you can identify with this topic. I certainly can. And one of the observations that I'm making as I age, and I say that a lot because I'm enjoying the aging process where I am in my life right now at 56 years old. I can still physically do a substantial portion of everything that I've always been able to do. Plus, I have the benefit of learning and experience through suffering that have enabled me um, to be at peace more frequently. So I feel like a credible source of a perspective on this topic of betrayal of trust. This is a very frequent subject when it comes to crisis de-escalation, particularly in the intimate partner context. Interventions occurring between romantic relationship partners, housemates, family members, siblings, that kind of thing, where relationships are very, very tight, um, very trusting. Uh, there's long duration, and then something happens where there is a perceived betrayal, and consequently there is crisis. And in institutional settings and youth and family settings and even community settings, there are occasions where professionals have to respond to help manage the crisis. Um, and then, of course, in interpersonal relationships, there are very deep betrayals of trust that are not a beneficiary of some kind of intervention, and people just have to live with it. It's a very um, uh, hmm, I'd say, incendiary topic because a very common response to trust betrayal is to terminate or end relationship in the service of not wanting to feel hurt anymore. If you're on the betrayal side and you betray someone's trust, either voluntarily or involuntarily, there is a side of the you know, shit sandwich that also needs to be consumed very often, unless you have high sociopathy or psychopathy. Please note that this discussion today is not really going to focus on the kinds of people that use trust violations for secondary gain or advantage in relationships. There are people that do that, lots of them, by the way, and not all of them are in institutions. Um, we have some very, very high functioning people with high sociopathy and high levels of leadership in business organizations and um, uh, let's just say bureaucracy. There are very, very high functioning people with high sociopathy in those settings, but we're not going to talk about them. Let's talk about, in common parlance, what happens in a betrayal of trust and some of the typical responses and some ways that perhaps those can be revised. Uh, I have experienced a extraordinary amount of suffering in my um, life, particularly my adult life, due to perceived betrayal, where I engage in trust, I become vulnerable, I share things that are very deep and personal, or I share something um, I'll share a little bit without tipping my hand completely. Let's say it's also very common in the commercial space for people to come together, for people to have ideas, for those ideas to be shared, for those some of those ideas to rest very solidly on someone's um, thought innovation. It's really their idea, and the idea is then taken and then projected out in the public as theirs. And there are experiences of betrayal that happen all over the place in commercial partnerships over those kinds of issues. Um, there are, I think, some beliefs that go along with betrayal. There's variance in what those beliefs are, but I think here are some big ones. Um, I think a very common experience for people who are betrayed initially is a very critical and negative self appraisal. What is wrong with me that this has happened? What have I done to deserve this? Why am I being punished by God or the universe? This hurts. This really sucks. I do not want to trust anyone anymore now because I don't want to feel this. This is a very common, let's call it a reaction. It's a very common reaction to an experience of being betrayed. I don't know about you, but thank goodness in our thought leadership and education spaces, we are talking more and more about the health implications of social isolation. And why would someone want to socially isolate? Why would someone want to withdraw? Well, the avoidance of discomfort certainly is a very strong motivating factor. I do not want to feel hurt. I don't want to trust anybody. Um, I'm going to offer a courageous revision to this that's based on, at least anecdotally, my experience and certainly a number of the thought leaders and social philosophers and thinkers whose work I've become familiar with. Um, Even in the closest relationships, there exists a capacity for betrayal and a risk factor associated with being in an intimate relationship where betrayal is going to show up. Just sit with that for a moment. In a relationship with your kid, in a relationship that's intimate or romantic, in a friend relationship or sibling, cousin, family relationship, community relationship, there is risk of betrayal. There's risk of the hurt that will be experienced by observing and being on the receiving side of betrayal. That's present. I think it's a myth to believe or assume that there's no risk of that. Uh, I think parenting is a wonderful opportunity to manage feelings, thoughts, and beliefs that go along with the betrayal category of thought. Because youngsters, as they begin to individuate and engage the world, may not be fully forthcoming and transparent and truthful all the time. And one might say that those, let's say, less than high stakes kinds of betrayals, I went into the cookie jar when I said I didn't. I borrowed money from this person when I said I didn't. My father used to tell me all the time, um, Andy, if you drink chocolate milk at lunch, it's going to turn your stomach black. And every time in the lunch line in grade school, I would pick the white milk, but once in a while I would pick the chocolate milk. And I would tell him that I I drank the white milk because I did not want to feel like I disappointed him, and I clearly betrayed his preference, his wish, his instruction, and had the chocolate milk anyway. Now, that's not a real high risk event. That's not a high stakes event, but it's certainly a learning opportunity for both, in my case, parent and youth, because I'm engaging in behavior that I said I wouldn't do. I'm engaging in behavior differently than I said I would do. So I have to manage this experience of carrying, I had the regular plain white milk today. Um, I abided by the instruction, or I had this chocolate milk and I didn't abide by the instruction. And for a period of time there, I'm living with, let's say, the presence of this feeling, the salience of this feeling. And maybe if I ignore it or suppress it, it stops feeling uncomfortable until I do it again. And then maybe at some point my father finds out and he confronts me about it. Some things to think about when managing betrayal. As cliche as it might sound, probably a category where it's the hardest to do is to consider that the motivation to betray my trust has nothing to do with me. To not take it personally. I'm not saying there aren't occasions where I might have had an active role in someone's betrayal toward me. But I would, as an initial thought, as a method of managing it, until proven otherwise, what if I committed to this idea that I'm going to do my level best to try to look at the behavior dispassionately rather than internalize that something is wrong with me, and in that something being wrong, someone betrayed trust. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't loving enough. I wasn't present enough. I wasn't giving enough. I wasn't something enough. I think people very often resort to that level of self-appraisal when someone else betrays. Now, I'm not saying it happens all the time, but I think it's pretty common. What if we considered, as a rule to ourselves, I'm going to allow the thought that it has nothing to do with me to be louder than a critical self-appraisal? Would that enable me to look at what happened leading to the betrayal differently? I think so. It certainly does that for me. I personally allow room for and think about, because I have felt the extraordinary suffering from betrayal. I look at the closest people to me and realize that they are not perfect. And at some point, someone who I adore or love may very well engage in some kind of behavior that causes me to feel betrayed. That's a tough enterprise to do. My therapist describes it this way, and I love this expression: always maintain a nodding acquaintance with grief. In other words, rather than the belief that there is an absolutely perfect relationship that can be had with another human being, where trust can never be violated, I no longer have that belief. So, Andy, are you telling me that you anticipate and live with the possibility that the people closest to you, your wife, your daughters, could engage in some kind of behavior where you feel the discomfort of betrayal? Yes. Um, that means an acceptance that not only am I going to have to manage the discomfort associated to that, I have to consider before it happens, to what degree will I maintain relationship? To what degree will I be willing to understand what happened, assert appropriately a report on how I feel and what I need, and then to move forward in the relationship. I'll reveal that I have a long-standing friend with whom there was, to my perception, a very confusing misunderstanding that resulted in this person's withdrawal from me right now. Drawing conclusions that I never intended. I made an overture to try to solve it. There was continued withdrawal. Rather than unfriend, cut him off, manage the discomfort and the sadness from this relationship clearly being on pause, I'm waiting and not ending the commitment I have to this person, which means that each day I have to be willing to live with the sadness and the discomfort that comes from not providing closure. I want to add closure to this because I got to get over this feeling and move on with my life. Bullshit. If that's the approach, then there's no relationship capacity. Now, are there some people in my life that I have experienced betrayal from and willingly have no contact with? You bet. It's smaller than the number of fingers on one hand, but there are a few. And it doesn't mean that I harbor hostility or animus toward them. It just means that in the preservation of my own sanity and in my own appraisal of risk, I have found that to be the best option. Would they agree? Maybe not. But that's how I've come to manage it. And the key, for me at least, is a willingness in every occurrence as much as possible to allow room for, to hold space for the possibility that my trust can be betrayed. And in doing so, I will not be surprised by the person it comes from. I'm not going to like how it feels, but I'm not going to be surprised. And this is not the same and should not be reduced to a cliche such as, I think of one which is similar. Be friendly with everyone you meet, but, have a plan to do them harm if need be. What I'm talking about should not be reduced to something as ridiculous as that. That's ridiculous. But to not be surprised by the manifestation of betrayal in a close relationship is to square with reality. And what's reality? Human beings are imperfect and fragile. People have an ability to intentionally or unintentionally betray trust. When I consider the people closest to me, what am I going to do if that happens? I have had the good fortune of people coming back to me because of this fundamental commitment and reporting how constructive it was for them that I was this way. I had to do some things in the course of my career that not everybody liked, particularly in terms of change initiatives and reducing human rights violations that were occurring. This did not make a lot of people happy, and I was very, very focused on the mission goals. So much so that the mission was more important in some cases than relationship. And I paid some price for that. But to those who saw a willingness to stay in relationship no matter the discomfort, I have to tell you that the large majority of those converted and turned around to where some of my strongest, most reliable relationships professionally originated in people detracting from what we were trying to do and becoming, let's say, supportive of what we were doing and wanting to become aligned with it. So, what are the big takeaways from this today? This is a heavy topic. Betrayal is going to happen. The possibility of it happening in your closest relationships is very real. Are you committed to relationship, or are you committed to avoiding discomfort and sadness associated with the betrayal? The one you choose is going to dictate the quality of your relationships moving forward. Dalton in Roadhouse said it this way when he was getting stapled up after the fight that he had, where he got cut and he didn't want anesthesia. Anyone who's in crisis de-escalation knows the Dalton speech, or at least most people do. Great movie. He looked at the doctor. Doctor said, "You don't want a local?" And Dalton looked at the doctor and said, "Pain doesn't hurt." Now, he wasn't saying that he doesn't feel the discomfort that we describe as pain. It just means that it's something that people ideally accept and go through, to having a nodding acquaintance with grief. That doesn't mean make grief your friend. It's a nodding acquaintance. It's over there. It's right there all the time. And the only relationship that could truly be perfect and truly be faithful and truly be inerrant in its reliability, for me, is my relationship to God. For others, it might be their spiritual practice or tradition, the universe. I'm not going to proselytize anybody here. But all of this to say that human beings are imperfect. And there's a capacity for betrayal. And the more that one squares with that, the less the discomfort of betrayal hurts. I hope that you got something out of this today. I love doing these lives and I love meeting with all of you. Feel free to share something in the comments. I wish you all well, and stay tuned. Next week, we're going to have a cool, like 15-20-second intro video to these lives that I'm going to do. This Thursday, please join us on the Jumpstart Mastery Network for our live there, where we get a little deeper and, let's say, more intense on some of these discussions, because the people in that setting are professionals who are having to manage crisis very frequently. All the best to you. Take good care.